So why don't more people write books? When I tell people I'm a writer, one of the most common responses I get is, "Oh my goodness, I've always wanted to write a book." To which I always respond, "You should. Why haven't you?" I think there's a million reasons why people don't write their books, but I also think that most of those reasons are not very good ones. So I'm going to start a 3-part mini-series on the Yet podcast where I explore what I think are 3 of the biggest reasons that people don't write their books. Because I believe that the world needs more great stories. And I think that your story is worth writing. So I want to do everything I can do to help encourage and inspire you to get started and to keep going. I'm calling it Bad Reasons Not to Write Your Book. Hey, my name's TC Burr. Welcome to Yet, a podcast created to encourage you to get your goal or idea out of your head and into reality. On this podcast, you'll hear stories, encouragements, tips, and ideas to help you write your book, start your business, launch your podcast, or whatever it is you hope to accomplish. Because it's not that you haven't done it, it's just that you haven't done it yet. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Yet podcast. Today on the show, time is on your side. You know the song. Time is on my side. Is it though? That's what we're going to tackle in today's episode. Hey, this is part of a mini series. So recently I shared with you, if you listened to the last episode, you know this. It's been said that 80% of Americans want to write a book, but only 1% of them actually ever do it. To me, that is a complete travesty because I believe that the world needs more great stories. And so if you're one of those people who's always wanted to write a book but never have, I want to encourage you with this show that you can and you should. The world needs what you have to offer. And so I've set out in this mini series to kind of explore what I think are 3 of the big reasons why that 79% of Americans don't actually end up writing their books, with the hopes of proving to you, listener, that most of the ideas that we come up with, the reasons why we don't want to write our book, are actually not, though they may be many, they're not very good reasons. And so last episode, I talked about one of the big killers that I think crushes so many dreams of writing books, and that is the fear of failure. So go back and listen to that one if you haven't already. But today we're going to jump right in. We are going to talk about the second big reason why I think many people don't end up writing their book, even though they want to. And that is a perceived lack of time. And I say perceived because one of the big takeaways that I want you to take from this episode right from the very beginning is that though you may be very busy and you may have lots going on in your life, get ready, this might sting a little bit. Each of us has the same amount of time in a day. Your 24 hours is no different than my 24 hours, or even the most successful writer that you can imagine still has 24 hours in a day. And so there's no concept of someone having more time or less time when it comes to our day-to-day existence, right? What really comes into question is how much responsibility we have, how much free time do we have, and where do we prioritize the time that we do have? And so time is the one commodity that we as a people, we have a finite amount of. You can always get more money, you can always get more stuff, you can always get more whatever, but time is the one thing that we won't be able to get any more of. We have a finite amount of time that is fixed as far as our earthly existence is concerned. And so we want to make sure that we're using our time wisely. And so I like the idea of thinking of time as currency because it is something that you possess and it's something that you're able to spend and invest. And so even think about the way that we talk about our time. We talk about it in financial terms, right? We talk about spending your time wisely. We talk about investing your time. So trading your time for experiences or things that will matter in the long term and that will benefit you in the long term. We talk about the ability to waste time, right? So if you're spending your time doing things that aren't important or don't provide value to your life, that could be considered a waste. But I think it's helpful for us to think about time in terms of financial resources because there are some real parallels. But the big difference is, again, we all are given the same amount of time. Again, when we think about our day-to-day, and it's a finite amount. So, in terms of your life, you have a certain amount of time that you're going to be here. And how are you spending that time? So, I talked about this not long ago in my my episode in season 1 called Redeem the Hidden Time. I encourage you to go back and check that one out, but I'm actually going to share a little bit of that as well. I wrote about it on my blog too, which you can read at tcburr.com, but I'm going to share it with you again at the risk of repeating myself because I think it's that important. And I know from my professional life that sometimes you have to repeat key messaging up to 7 times for people to actually remember it. So I'm going to remind you again of some of the things that I said in that episode that's also available on the blog. So 72 hours. That's the amount of leftover time each of us has each week after you consider a 40-hour work week plus 8 hours of sleep each night. 72 hours. So you think about like kind of the time that everybody has. And the first thing that often comes to mind when we think about objections to an idea like everyone's got the same amount of time, you will say, well, yeah, sure. But I've got kids and sports and activities and work and meetings and travel and all these things that I have to do that I don't necessarily have control over that are demanding of my time. 100% agree. I'm right there with you. But it's pretty incredible to think that each week we have 72 hours of quote leftover time after we consider 40-hour work week plus 56 hours. So that's 8 hours a night for 7 days. There's still 72 hours left over. A lot of that gets chewed up by meals and commutes and other obligations that we have. Totally understand. But it's helpful for me to think about, I've got this bank of 72 hours that is relatively negotiable. I get to choose where I'm spending that time, where I'm investing that time, and there's a pretty big bank from which to draw. Each of us, I think, feels that way. We all have goals or ideas that we want to do. We know that if we want to write a book, we've got to dedicate time to it. And sometimes it's easy for us to make excuses and say, hey, if I only had more time, I'd be able to be further along on my book. I'd be able to do more. I'd be able to accomplish more of my goals. So I just want to gently push against this. And I want to use, I want to reference Laura Vanderkam. So you've probably heard me talk about Laura before. She's a time management expert. I would commend to you her podcast. It's called Before Breakfast. These are great, like 5-minute episodes, but they're super tangible, super helpful, and I've really enjoyed. So go check out the Before Breakfast podcast with Laura Vanderkam. But she also wrote a book called 168 Hours. You have more time than you think. So she points out again that each week has 168 hours, which seems like a world of time. Then you subtract the 40 for sleep, or 40 for work, 56 for sleep. You're left with 72. So my question to you, listener, is what are you doing with that time? Lots of that time, again, gets eaten up with good and right pursuits like spending time with friends and family, chores around the house, meals, other essentials. But how much of your time is spent mindlessly scrolling or binging your favorite show or pursuing any type of leisure? Check the screen time app on your phone, for example, if you dare. What does your week look like? For me, that's often a very convicting thing to do. But what if you invested half of that time toward your book? How much more progress would you make if you did that? Now, you'll have counters to this, right? You might come back to me and say that time doesn't often present itself in 3-hour blocks, which is what a lot of us think we need in order to write. Like my best writing days generally happen when I get up early on a Saturday. I have nowhere to go as far as work or activities. My wife and my daughter love to sleep in. My boys get up early, but I've got a block of time where I can roll my sleeves up, pour a nice hot cup of coffee, stretch my fingers, and really start writing. Those are my best writing days. But they don't always happen like that. More likely, you'll get 5 minutes in between meetings or 15 minutes in the car on the way to work or school or between your activities. But one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is, again, redeeming what I call that hidden time. So that time when you're standing in line at the grocery store, can you pull out your phone and start typing out some notes of your book? Or even when you're in the car, can you click on your voice recorder and talk through some of your ideas? This is all beneficial and helpful when it comes to writing your book. So here's an example that I do from the fitness world. So one of the goals I've had this year is to be more focused on my own personal fitness. And so that means by the way, I'm reading a lot of this from my blog post. That means intentional scheduled trips to the gym, but it also means using short windows of time that I do have toward getting in shape. So for example, 2 days a week, my employer lets me work from my house. And on those days, oftentimes I will get 5 to 10 minute break between meetings. So during those breaks, I get up, I walk around the house. Sometimes I even step outside if it's nice out. I will do 20 push-ups or air squats, and it still leaves me time to grab a quick bio break or a snack and get back to my desk. If I do that 10 times a day, that's 200 reps, which is not bad. A former boss inspired me to, whenever possible, take a meeting from headphones on an outdoor walk. This works great on these one-on-one check-ins when there's no note-taking or visual aids. And if the weather's nice, I do this whenever I can. It works great for those work from home days, but there's also a great outdoor space when I'm in the office, and I use that too. I also stand most of the day while I'm at work. So you can see I have these little rhythms built in. I have these little things that I do that are all kind of geared toward that big goal of being more focused on fitness and activity. I always take the stairs, for example. I park farther away than is maybe reasonable for most people so that I get to walk further. So these are all intentional decisions that I'm making that are focused on the end goal of being physically fit and active. And in the same way, I think we can recognize the time that we have and invest so that we're making intentional, practical things, rhythms, and habits that we can get ourselves into that will lead us toward that ultimate goal of more progress on our books. And as I've said before on this show, progress is success. So again, each of us has the same amount of time in a given week. We have more of this hidden time than we know. Where can you find those small windows of hidden time in your week, and what activities can you fit into them? Because if you start doing that little by little over time, they will really start to accumulate and add up, and you will start to see amazing progress and success. So here's a tip. Start today by performing these two activities. Number one, break it down. When it comes to your book, what are some super small steps that you could take in 15 minutes or 5 minutes? The 20 push-ups that I mentioned earlier, that's a fitness example, but for writers, it might be read what you wrote yesterday or write 50 to 100 words. If you do that enough times, you're eventually going to end up with a book. Number two, survey your schedule. For the next week or so, notice and write down the hidden time that you have. So these are those moments when you're in the grocery store or, you're walking the dog or whatever, things where you could be investing toward your writing, maybe even while you're doing something else. Think of this like tracking your spending in order to create a budget. Now that you're armed with these two pieces of information, you'll be able to more easily match up those 15-minute tasks with the 15-minute windows of time that naturally occur in your regular day-to-day schedule. You'll feel better about how you're managing your time, and progress toward your goal will start to pick up. If you accomplish a 15-minute task every day for a month, that's nearly 8 hours of working towards your goal. That is almost a full work day that you perhaps have not been investing toward your writing. Do that 12 times, right? You've got that throughout the course of the year. You can see how this really starts to compound and add up. And so that's really the big thing I want to leave you with today. The number two biggest reason that I think many, many people do not write their books is because they don't think they have the time. And that's the question that you always often hear when someone says, I tell people, hey, I work full time. I've got 3 kids. I'm doing a podcast. And oh, by the way, I'm also writing a book. And one of the questions is, where do you find the time? And it's not that you just find it like you're walking down the street and find a quarter on the sidewalk. It's not just going to show up like that. You have to actually go and look for it. But if you look, I believe that you'll find more of those hidden moments than you think are possible. And those moments of hidden time, if used correctly and if invested in appropriately over time, can really start to add up and show huge progress and huge value in your life. So like with anything, you practice you get the equipment, and you have your mindset ready. And so you've maybe heard of this red car experiment, where if someone mentions to you the idea of a red car, now you go about your day and you're starting to notice all these red cars everywhere. Maybe they were invisible to you before, or you saw them, but you just never take note. But now that that idea is in your head, you see them everywhere. So similarly, look for these pockets of time and try to find those moments, those 10-minute breaks, 5-minute breaks, 15-minute breaks, where you can leverage those and invest in your writing. So again, time is a finite resource. It's something that we all have, but it's the only thing that we can't get more of. So think about your time as currency. You have the ability to spend it, invest it, or waste it. And by the way, I think there's such an idea as time well wasted. There's a song by Brad Paisley where he talks about time well wasted. I think, don't hear me say that you have to maximize every moment of every day and that you should never rest. That is the exact opposite of what I'm trying to say with this episode. I have said before, and I will say again, I think that rest is a critical ingredient of progress in any endeavor. And so I actually would say that one of the best investments you can make is prioritizing rest and relaxation. Build in breaks for yourself, for your mental health and your own well-being and connection with your family. All of those things are not optional. I think they're critical, and most of us don't get enough of those. And so please never, ever feel guilty about building in breaks for yourself. You are most likely not working according to anyone else's timeline or schedule. And so just remember, you're not behind. You're right where you need to be. Take breaks when you need them. Keep working. Find those hidden moments. And how can you lean into them and leverage them to make the most of them? Awesome. That's it for this episode. Next week, I'm going to talk about the big three. So last week we talked about, again, the reasons why people don't write their book. Fear of failure was one. A perceived lack of time is another. And on the next episode, I'm going to talk about what I think is another, and that'll end this mini series. The third big reason why I think more people don't find success in writing their book. So until then, I hope you like the show. And if you do, rate it, review it, share it with a friend. Thanks. Later. Hey, thanks so much for listening to today's episode. If you would do me a huge favor, if you got value out of this podcast, which I'm assuming maybe you did since you're still here, would you scroll down to the bottom of your podcast app and rate and review the show? And maybe share it with someone on social media or with a friend, just in a conversation. It would mean so much to get this message out to more people, and I think it would be amazing if you would share it. So that would be, as a personal favor to me, I'd really love it. Also, if you want to know more about me and what I'm working on, you can visit my website. It's tcburr.com. I hope you'll check it out. You can contact me there. Thanks again, and I really appreciate it. I'll talk to you soon.